Welcome back, everyone. I am your host, JC Lang, and this is part 2 of episode 9, The Night Watch, a history of police in America. In the last episode, we looked at the beginnings of the police here in the States. Then after that, we talked about Hollywood's role in shaping our minds, and then we also looked at all the recent incidents that have led to protests and riots. Today, we pick up where we left off, which was at the KKK. We're going to look at their spread and influence, as well as the true evolution of the police up to modern times. As usual, though, let's get into some updates.
Today's updates.
I fucked up in part 1 when I was talking about Sean Bell, and I called him Sean Bean. So that's probably the biggest update. And no doubt, because we were talking about, Game of Thrones and The Night Watch and all of that and fucking psychosomatic bullshit, Sean Bean pops into my head, and I make a verbal faux pas talking about a serious situation, and it was a mistake, and I apologize, and moving on. Update 2. We got our first winner for the edible giveaway. I hope you are happy, and thank you so much for participating in the giveaway. Everybody else didn't really pay attention. And I guess we got to redirect on how to do giveaways, right? That was the first giveaway, and I don't think it was as effective as I wanted it to be. I said like and share the page, and everybody just shared the post. So maybe I could have had it set up differently to where if you were sharing the post, it was the page. But either way, Thorne was the only one that actually shared the page by happenstance, and so ends up winning the contest. So congratulations, man, and I hope you have enjoyed the edibles from Dazed and Infused Baking Co. At Dazed Treats. They are super fucking awesome, and I love their treats, and I love all the things that they do there, and I'm so happy and thankful that they helped to create this giveaway. And so hopefully moving forward, I can actually do it in a better way that gets everybody involved. And but lesson learned, and it was a good one. And Thorne, fucking hope you're happy, buddy. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody that did share the post and that does listen. But yeah, like and share the page. It reminded me of too, like going back and listening to it was it reminded me of those tests that we would do in school where it would say to read all of the questions, and then we would read all of the questions, and at the end it would say, don't do the test. And that's what it reminded me of. So lesson learned. I guess yeah, right. So moving on. What's the next one? Where are we at now? I am currently writing each episode as they come out, and it's a lot to do in these short time frames. And so I think what might need to be done is that either after this episode or the next one, we're going to shut it down for a month or so. So in order for me to be able to write 3 or 4 or 5 episodes and then be able to have them able to just come out and then continually be able to write, as opposed to writing it all on the fly and then having these gaps and then coming up with these ideas to add in for sound effects and try to make it fucking super cool on the fly is hard. So I want to be able to do it much, much better and be much more consistent, and this is probably the only way. And they say that's how you're supposed to start this shit when you do it anyway, like have 3 or 4 in the pocket, bird in the hand's worth 2 in the bush, whatever the fuck. I didn't do that. Everything else just kind of happened the way it happened, and then BLSS was born, and it was just fucking hit the ground running, and let's see what happens and see how this goes as we play the game. So I think we're going to shut it down fully and then produce 4 episodes and then come back in a month or so, or a month and a half. In order to give you the show I want to give you, I need to have more time to prep and promo, and unless somebody out there wants to get involved. So feel free to reach out to me if you do on Twitter or Facebook at Want Some Spook, and we can talk, and otherwise we'll be taking a break to be able to give you something even better with hopefully less traffic in the background. And, but that's it for the updates, guys. Let's get the show on the road. Can't wait to give you guys part 2 here of episode 9. It is intense. There's a lot going on. There's a lot more dots that end up connecting. And so let's get into it. This is part 2 of The Night Watch, a history of police in America. All right, so we ended the last episode at the KKK and its creation by Nathan Bedford Forrest, and we also came to the shocking realization that he tried to shut the fucking Klan down shortly after its creation due to the violence in 1869. However, the KKK rapidly grew from a secret societal fraternity to a paramilitary force bent on reversing the federal government's progressive Reconstruction era activities in the South, especially policies that elevated the rights of the local African American population. Now, the name of the KKK was derived from the Greek word kyklos, or I don't fucking know, man. I tried to have Google help me say this, but I forgot how to say it. So but it means circle. And and then they added the Scottish Gaelic word for clan. But clearly they changed the C to a K because, fuck America. And now racism in the South had been cemented early, as we went over in part one. And much of America's military understanding comes from the South as well. And remember, they were fighting fucking Jack Sparrow, the conquistadors, the Mexicans, the French, and the fucking natives, and the Philippines. All of this gave birth to the infamous Citadel Academy in South Carolina in 1847. This is how we begin to see the entanglement of the KKK with America's armed forces. Once the KKK is formed and they get on their bullshit, it spreads like wildfire across the country. Weak-minded individuals all over the place get lulled into this false sense of security provided by joining these fuckers in the Klan, In a few southern states, Republicans organized militia units to break up the Klan. And then in 1871, the Ku Klux Act passed through Congress. And that authorized President Ulysses S. Grant to use military force to suppress the KKK, The Ku Klux Act resulted in 9 South Carolina counties being placed under martial law and in thousands of arrests. Yeah, and still though, right, even after all this kinds of shit, which pretty much almost ended the KKK, here we are, dealing with, so much of the same problems, right? After the Ku Klux Act, we see the KKK die down for a while, but then they come roaring back in 1910 and 1920 due to immigration issues. And then in 1950, again, prior to the Civil Rights Movement. Now, I think it bears mentioning here, the Klan was severely reduced in numbers right until the end of World War II. There was all kinds of infighting, there was all kinds of bullshit that was going on, right? And it was like all scattered and fucked up. And then at the end of Operation Paperclip, after all these Nazis are brought into America, we see a fucking boom in the KKK. And we're still feeling it to this very day. Supremacy issues are so bad that even in 2006, the FBI released a paper called White Supremacist Infiltration of Law Enforcement. And it specifically states that white supremacist groups are infiltrating law enforcement communities or recruiting law enforcement personnel. Now, this is kind of a funny thing because we're going to get into the FBI, but let's continue, right? The report, based on the FBI investigations and open sources, warned, for example, that skinhead groups were actively encouraging their members to become ghost skins, as they call them, within law enforcement agencies, right? This is a term that the white supremacists use to describe members who totally avoid any overt displays of their beliefs, So this way they can blend into a society and covertly advance white supremacist issues, Like they'll just drop that shit in your ear, like little fucking things. They'll be at a party and somebody says some shit, makes one of those fucked up jokes, you know what I mean? See who laughs, gets at that person, like crazy shit, like when you read about how all this stuff goes down. And this is all stuff that's happening still to this very, very day, Now keep this in mind, right? The KKK was almost quote unquote beat right up until we brought the Nazis over here. And then directly after that, we begin to see the swastika become something that is synonymous with the KKK hate groups. And it was something that I always was curious about, right? And it was something that just kind of came to fruition. You guys are going to see, right? You'll see how all this ends up fucking coming together as this progressed, right? So as we went over, right, the KKK was pretty much almost wiped out after the Ku Klux Act, right? And then in 1915, we see them come fucking flying back on the scene. And this is what is called the second iteration, or the second regime of the KKK, and it was rushed into existence with the silent film, The Birth of a Nation. It's a racist, revisionist take on the Civil War. Dude, it's fucked up. Like, pull this shit up. It's called The Birth of a Nation, 1915. And they used it as like a recruitment thing, everything, The massive movement that was spawned by the film was because of immigration influx, we just mentioned shit like that earlier, So here we go, there's all these immigrants that are moving to America, and then the fucking Klan sees that as an opportunity, and they jump on this whole machine, The newly revived KKK was a total emotional reaction from a people that just saw diversity as a threat, And what's worse was that their racism was viewed as patriotism, and there's reasons for all of this, like how all of this develops, like as we go forward. It's fucking nuts, man. So in 1922, right, during an interview with the Daily Telegram, one of the hate group's officers said that the Ku Klux Klan is one of the purest, noblest, most cleanest, most Christian, most patriotic organizations that had ever done come into God's existence on this creation that I call here Earth. Dinosaur bones are a lie. Fucking mic drop. And let's pause right here, right? Because the whole use of like the religion aspect to fucking like really get into people's heads, like that's what created like all of this. It's something that like it blows me away, as just a side note to all of this, on how like we're so easily manipulated through religion en masse. As far as like groups of people seem to get swayed so swiftly, and these currents of emotions, and so much of it is based on these religious tenets, and it's crazy to me. It's crazy. And it's not to say, anything's wrong with being religious. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just, the way it's used and the way we allow ourselves to get swept up in the whole shit is something that I'm still trying to make sense of myself, personally, because it's fucking nuts. The way we see, these types of situations happen over and over again. There's always some kind of religious aspect. If it's not Iran, it's here, and if it's not here, it's a Nazi, where it's like, oh, it's God, and it's always something about the oppressed and the oppressor. There's always God involved, when it comes to this topic at the end of the day. It's very trippy to me. And but yeah, super sidetracked right now. So another interesting thing to note here is that the rise of the Klan in America is directly tied to the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. I haven't found specific ties yet, or like who the funding actually came from. I guess I can. It's not hard, but I'm just trying to write all of this shit, and like I said, it's all a run and gun, so it's hard to really dig without wasting too much time, because I get lost in imagination with all this shit, and I have to read things like 4 or 5 times because I'm caught up in my head before I'm writing it, and then I'm writing it, and then I'm in my head 4 or 5 times. I'm just constantly imagining, trying to dream up what this situation could possibly be like in my head, and I spend more time in there than out here, and I'm working on it. But yeah, right. So it just seems that the longer we do the show, the more random and more specific ties we're being able to find. So whatever it all means, we're just gonna have to wait and see, because nothing is as it seems. But as it stands now, we are seeing the fruition of the Klan's plans 100 years later. From 1920 to 2020. This is 100 years of pure progress, on the Klan's behalf. Anyway, if it is just the Klan. What we see here is a concerted effort to infiltrate and subvert local and national law enforcement, and it's all with the expressed intent of victimizing people of color, right? And in the years moving forward, we begin to see the evolution of these groups, and the thing that I find astonishing is that the KKK and Nazism both grew at the same fucking time, right? It only took Hitler 5 years to come to power. In 1915, The Birth of a Nation is released, and then in 1920, the Nazi regime comes to power in Germany, and then in 1921, what is called the Second Klan rises to power in Atlanta, and it was directly fucking funded by Nazi Germany. And now this is where shit starts to get a little fucking crazy, right? The Third Klan comes to power in 1946 after the fall of the Third Reich, which was Hitler's Nazi party. Fucking crazy, right? Now, fucking pay attention as we go forward, because the police as they have existed up to this point, along with many military divisions, would never fucking be the same, So after 5 years of Hitler's dictatorship, the Nazi police had won the FBI's seal of approval. The Nazi police state was so admired by the world powers of the day that even J. Edgar Hoover, the then head of the FBI, actually sent his right-hand man, Edmund Patrick Coffey, to Berlin in 1938 at the invitation of Germany's secret police. This was also the year that Hitler made the cover of Time magazine as Man of the Year, right? Which goes to show how fucking wild this whole thing is, dude. According to the New York Times, in the years after the war, the FBI and everyone else aggressively recruited thousands of Nazis. many of whom were Hitler's top men. And some of this goes beyond just paperclip. The link between the KKK infiltration of the force as well and the Nazi agenda will continue to pop up as we're going to go along. And I'm sorry, but it's fucking true. You know, I know like there's all this Nazism and shit, and it's like I'm so not trying for it to be this way, but it just always ends up being here. And there's no other way, especially with the way things are right now. Like, we cannot ignore it anymore. Especially, like, when you look at this shit, like, come the fuck on. The way these numbers work out, the way these times work out, time frames, like, just watch as we go forward. Like, it's fucking stupid, right? You know, so during all this infiltration and racism, you have its equal operating in other sectors, you know, and by its equal, I mean classism and the oppression of the working class, you know. And for a long time in this country, we had things like private police forces, you know, and they were in service for a very, very long time, you know. Like, for example, we had the Coal and Iron Police in Pennsylvania, and they existed in between 1865 and 1931 and were vicious. They were approved by the state, and they were ran and funded by private organizations. If you ever played Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption, perhaps you will recognize the name Pinkerton. The Pinkerton Detective Agency was the one who ran the show when it came to strike breaking. And under them, we have seen the most brutal tactics that the police still use today. And they were the one who taught us how to break a workforce through their use of strikebreakers and excessive force, you know? Now, a strikebreaker in and of themselves, right? They were just pieces of shit that got selected to do the job by who the fuck ever made the decision at the time, you know? And most of them were just common gunmen, general fuck faces, and all around dickbags, you know? And they all used tactics that they learned from slavery, bounty hunting, and all kinds of other shit, you know? And now they were even incorporating espionage into workers' groups to find out who the fuck to drag out of their house and fuck up in the middle of the street, you know? And they did this to send a fucking message to anyone who thinks that they fucking deserve rights. The Pinkertons were once larger than the U.S. Army, and they were considered a paramilitary wing, like a whole fucking thing. You know, and as was just stated, you know, they were often hired to fuck up strikers, demanding fair wages and treatment and all that shit, you know? And this often created a lot of problems, you know. And so as the police ended up growing, the private eyes, which was a term coined by the Pinkerton Agency, ended up being absorbed into the police and the FBI, as well as their tactics, as we can see from modern day shit. You know, and it turns out that the use of excessive force by local law enforcement officers was not solely a people of color problem. As urban populations swelled with migrants and immigrants at the turn of the century, police brutality fucking went through the roof, and it plagued the cities, you know? Even the newspapers of the time were noticing that the frequency in which the working class were arrested without cause, or beaten on the street, or in jail, or fucking tortured into confessing a crime. Things that still happen to this day, you know? Prisoner abuse scandals have been one of the biggest problems for the working class as long as we go back. You know, as long as there have been factories of any kind in this land, there has always been abuse and excessive force and all kinds of fucked up shit that we're going to talk about, right? So in 1910, right, the LA Herald wrote, "Not a week passes without some new instance of the injury or death of a prisoner somewhere in the United States. The police of this country apparently cannot rid themselves of a delusion that they are invested with judiciary powers and can discipline as well as arrest suspects and accused persons." So basically what that means is that even way back in the 1900s, right, the newspapers were writing about how fucking absolutely drunk with power the police force was, and that they were fucking up everybody. You know, if this is making the papers back then, you know, it would have been different. But like, so if they're talking about, you know, beating people up, that means they're fucking up everybody. You catch my drift? You know, because I feel like if they were just beating up black and brown or red faces and shit like that, like that's not really gonna make the news. Not back then, you know. But if they're bringing this shit up in the news, that means there's a lot of fucking people, you know, and a lot of them must be white because it's making the news, right? If we go by today's kinds of reasoning or methodology on how shit works, right? So this is something that's been going on way the fuck back. You know, ever since these dudes were walking around with billy clubs and shit, they've been fucking beating people with them. Like, Now, this was also the time the FBI was created, and in its early phases, the FBI was instrumental in protecting civil liberties, right? But that was just the beginning. It's a far cry from the shit that we've seen them do in Portland and the things that we know that they do today, you know? But I'm gonna need you to hang on to that fucking oh shit handle, baby, because we're on a high-speed chase to the truth. The evolution of the police force up to this point has been one of clear tyrannical abuse hidden under a blue mask, right? One that undoubtedly starts with discrimination at its heart. Discrimination for the red man and the disobedient. And then it evolves again into an iron fist being held over the slaves. And then it evolves once again as an iron fist now ruling over the working class as well, right? And then right up until nowadays is where we still see that they are very much the right arm of the bourgeois. And the enemy is very much us, any of us, all of us. Doesn't matter, you know? Now, there was a good reason for how it's become the way it has. And it's because of you lazy pieces of shit. What the fuck? No. I mean, it kind of is our fault when you break it down, you know. It's all of our fault because we allow it still to this day, but I digress. You know, we're going to see how, you know, we've been taught to think like this, you know, and taught to be this way. And so while it may be us, this is still a grand design. But with that being said, it means that we can change paths at any fucking time we want. You know, we are the ones that control this path, you know? So whichever path that we choose is the path that we go. You know what I mean? All we have to do is put down the shit that we've been carrying up to this point, you know? But I digress. So while yes, there is classism and racism involved, there's also deeper values at work here. Now, aside from all that, though, you know, the problem that we as individuals are facing on the street is with the police, right? Human to human. You know, and yes, there was a system in place, but these are still people, and these people have been persuaded and militarized, you know, and to understand how they became militarized, we need to look at the father of modern policing, right, who is August Vollmer. He is the one that led the militarization of the police in the early 1900s, you know, but he also required officers to be college graduates, and clearly that's something that has been rolled back, you know, years ago at this point. But, you know, we found this promo from before Vollmer took over. Check it out.
Hi, kids. My name is Officer Schutz.
Hi, Officer Schutz.
Today, I'll be telling you what it means to protect and serve.
Yay!
The day you earn that badge is the day that joins you with some of the finest men and women ever to bash a skull in the name of corporate oppression. To be a police officer is to be a representation of what brought this country together, such as degradation, oppression, and a great set of words called qualified immunity. Say that for me, kids.
Qualified immunity.
Now, I know you got a couple of questions for old Officer Schutz, so let's take some before we get started. You there, little girl, what's your name?
Sally.
And just what do you think a cop's job is, Miss Sally?
To protect and serve the community.
No, not even a little bit. Who else has a question? You there. What's your question, champ?
What happens if you're in danger?
Oh, that's a great question, sport. Well, even if I suspect someone might do me harm, I can just shoot that black guy. I'm sorry. I can just shoot that bad guy as many times as I want.
But won't you get in trouble for excessive force?
No, not even a little. Ah, the precious youth.
That's bullshit.
Now, while you can look through all of Vollmer's achievements and be amazed, if you're not paying close attention, you might miss out on a crucial piece of information, especially in regards to how things stand today. You know, now you might be asking, like, who the fuck is this Vollmer clown? But settle down, champion. I'm going to tell you, all right? I mean, I love that you want to know, but we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're almost there. We're almost there. Hold on, right? So, all right, so this is another one of those things that is funny by way of coincidence, right? Like, Vollmer is a very German name, and he just happened to rise up through the ranks of the American police and education system, yeah? And he served in the Marines. He fought 25 battles in the Spanish-American War in the Philippines. There were a lot of lessons learned by a great many in the Philippines. There were some of them that I wasn't able to incorporate into the show, but definitely if you want to look at some tactics that, you know, and where they came from, the Spanish-American War in the Philippines is where you can learn a lot of shit. From that, Vollmer goes on to rise through the force, right, where he becomes chief. And then after he's chief, he ends up teaching at Berkeley. And in his courses, he taught how they were racial types, right? And how some of the shit was hereditary, and there is a racial degeneration that all contributes to crime rates. And it's at this point that we see the formation of the police we see today in terms of like racial profiling. You know what I mean? And even deeper than that, right? So this is where a lot of these teachings all come from, is from Vollmer. People look to the slave patrols to point a finger at the root of the police, but all the way up until the early 1900s, police only really walked a beat, and they only had small mounted divisions. The horse-driven police carts and such were implemented to be able to see over walls and bushes, right? It's not necessarily as a scare tactic, you know, but and again, it's not to say that it wasn't used as such, but the creation was in for the purpose of the job requirements, not, you know, full racial tyranny. You know, the main officer, again, only walked a beat. And again, that's only until Vollmer in the 30s, right? So under Vollmer, police got cars and motorcycles, two-way radios, and all of the accoutrement that they have today. It was only after Vollmer that the police took on the look that we see today and the practices that people link to slave patrols, right? So now, here's the rub, right? So Vollmer was a staunch protector of civil rights and free speech, right? He employed the first black and women police officers on the West Coast and did a lot to reform the police, right? But also, quick side note here, right? The first ever black officer was back east in New York, and his name was Samuel Jesse Battle, and he served from 1911 to 1941. I meant to get to him back in part one, but we never did, and I apologize, but check him out. Really interesting story. Also, some fucked up shit too, but from that time, naturally. But Samuel Jesse Battle in New York, and from 1911 to 1941, if you're interested in learning about him. But he's definitely worth a read. But back to Vollmer, though, right? Outside of reforming how the police got from point A to point B, he also began the teaching of, again, racial profiling, right? So the easiest way to describe the way his teachings work is by using the scene from The Departed, where they're getting at Leo's character because his father was a criminal, you know? And so they're like, oh, you're a criminal too, and they're fucking with him. That's like that's that line of thinking. That it's hereditary. Vollmer believed that criminality was racially apparent and hereditary at that, and classist. So it's a trip to learn about him, right? Like, he did such good things and he had some good thoughts on the matter, but then he created the system that has run rampant to this very day. And he also happens to be German and all of this weird shit. Like, there's such this weird tie between Germany and America. It's so crazy. It goes back all the way too. But again, fucking hang in there with me, right? So, now all of this leads up to around the time of the end of World War II, right? So we get from everything that we just ran through, right? So that brings us all the way up to the end of World War II. Vollmer has done his thing. We went from all of these slave patrols and policings and night watches and the evolution as such, you know, to strike breakers and the Pinkertons, and then the FBI gets created and then they all get absorbed. And all of these people were always and nothing more than massive crooks and pieces of shit that just held law positions. You know, they were notoriously corrupt, all right from the beginning. Clearly, the whole system has been designed to single out people of color. Like, it's evident, you know, just how it behaves, you know. And then we have Vollmer comes on the scene and he reforms things, but he also creates racial profiling and these tendencies. So it's so crazy, right? Like, and then how the Nazis were funding shit, like a fucking trip, right? Let's take a quick commercial break so we can let some of this shit marinate. And then when we come back, we're going to dive into the rest of this fucked up story, right? So sit back, relax, and after these messages, we'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Dan. Are you tired of having those smart-ass motherfucking friends that use those big SAT words? Well, look no further than Dan's Dumb It Down device. With this device, all you have to do is place it in front of the smart motherfucker's mouth, and it translates those big words into tiny words. Let's go ahead and see how it works.
This device is very scintillating.
Wow, that's cool.
So as you can see, no longer will me, you, or any other of your dumb motherfucking friends will have to struggle with that glazed look in our eye when our smart friends are talking with their big ginormagantous words. So go ahead and get the or the Dan's Dumb It Down device at your local Walmart.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to run this bitch up, right? So during the years prior to the World Wars, we here in the States were going through some shit, right? And it is very much not unlike today, which is fucking insane. 100 years later, and the fire still burns. And it breaks my heart to think that things are still this way, but buckle up, Buttercup, because this trip down memory lane is a bombed out fucking road right through Normandy, right into the belly of the beast. Everything always seems to come back to the fucking Nazis, and I swear on the fucking most high upon high that I am so not trying to make that shit happen. But how do you ignore the FBI's fascination with the Nazi police? How do you ignore people like Putsy Hamstagel? Hanfstaengl. Hamstagel. And Pussy is Bavarian for little squirt, right? And it's also where we get the word putz from, right? So this fucking putz was responsible for the Nazi ideals being so widely welcomed in America, right? As if they even needed the fucking help, right? Now, if you ever found that Nazi dramatic music sounded very familiar, then you would be totally fucking right to think that, because they are all modeled after New England college football fight songs and shit. Most notably, the Harvard fight song was directly used to make the fucking Sieg Heil song that the Nazi fucking youth sung. Hamstagel was the author of all of it. Putsy's full name was Ernst Franz Sedgwick Hamstagel. Putsy was just a name that was given to him by the wet nurse, Now, if you know a thing or two because you've seen a thing or two, or if you're just from New England, you might be familiar with the Sedgwick name. If not, then look it up, because we don't have the time to devote to that part of it, right? But all in all, this Nazi Don Draper motherfucker had 2 Civil War general grandfathers and has deep ties to quote-unquote old New England blood, right? Wait.
What does this have to do with the police?
Wait, what do you mean, what does this have to do with the police?
Why all the Nazi shit again?
Well, when you think about it, that's how we ended up in our full position from all these things that happened, right? And it wasn't just racism and slavery. A large part of the problem became anti-Semitism and eugenics. But now I get what you're saying here, because we're all off on this Nazi shit again, So let me give you a quick rundown, right, of how all this shit plays out so we can kind of look at why we're here, right? So, like we said before, the Nazis were already funding the KKK by this point, remember? And now the thing here is that we actually inspired everything Hitler was all about. And then Hitler inspired us as to what was possible when it came to controlling the masses. This shit was like so symbiotic, it's ridiculous, Now, this is shit I didn't learn back in the Nazi episode, and I fucking super wish I did, because I wouldn't have to throw it into this episode, But the Henry Ford, right, the prolific, well-known automaker, was notoriously anti-Semitic. This is what inspired Hitler. And that sucks for me, because Ford was always an inspiration to me, because he didn't know everything. He wasn't classically trained. He was very smart. He knew how to use his hands and put a thing together. But outside of that, he knew how to get everybody else that knew how to do things. He didn't know, math that good, but he knew somebody that does. You know what I mean? He didn't know how to market that good, but he knew somebody that did. And he put all these people together and created this massive thing, from nothing, just being an average fucking Joe. And I always found that to be highly commendable about him. And then now I find out that this dude was like the fucking craziest anti-Semite in the world. And so much so that he even printed out his own newspaper and forced people to give it out. And it was all about fuck the Jews. It was like Mel Gibson all day, every day. And he wasn't even drunk. Fucking crazy shit, And so Hitler seen that shit, and he was like, yeah, this is a very good idea. I like this Henry Ford, And then he fucking goes and adds this all into his thing, right? So now, it turns out that, America was the blueprint for the Nazi ideal, and in turn, the Nazi blueprint became the ideal for American law enforcement. Basically everything that they did was taken from how we did things. They used Ford's anti-Semite teachings. They used Coca-Cola's marketing strategy. They learned how to create their concentration camps based on our own Native American reservations, which were basically concentration camps with a nicer name. The gas chambers were directly modeled after the way that we dealt with the Mexican immigration in 1917. The U.S. decided that the only way they'd allow these dirty Mexicans across the border is by forcing them to strip naked and then shaving their heads and then dousing them with poisonous pesticide. And now this is where this shit gets rougher, right? Because we all know, or most of us have heard about Zyklon B. And if you don't know about it fully, I ask that you look that shit up because we're already, running and gunning on time here, right? So now the story as it's told is that the evil Germans created Zyklon B for their use in the gas chambers, and I even misspoke and misreported on it in episode 1 where I said that they created it. But the truth is actually that Zyklon B was American made, and we were using it to delouse the clothing of these quote unquote filthy fucking Mexicans, right? And the carts that they came in. Now, so it was America that found that when you sprayed someone with it, that it resulted in instant fucking death. But we're not the ones that have been told that. We've been told that it was the Germans that were that. And it's even, and it's so deep that even looking up the research about it from reputable sources, they point directly to Nazi Germany. They do not point to America at all when it comes to Zyklon B. Maybe there are other things too. Maybe it's just what I was reading, but, fucking, like I say, I'm not perfect, but on average, the average thought process and most of the shit that I've ever heard and watched and listened to, all of it, really, I've never been told that, it was American made. And my dad used to always watch all of this old Nazi fucking movies and like all the documentaries from World War II and this and that. And they would talk about the concentration camps and the gas chambers. And it was never said that shit came out of America. But now we know is that we were the ones that created it. We were the ones that found that if you sprayed somebody with it, they would fucking instantly die. And furthermore, Hitler's master race philosophy came from the whole American eugenic movement, which again, if you've ever played Red Dead Redemption, you're familiar with this idea. The dude's name was Sir Francis Galton, the cousin of none other than Charles Darwin. Because, why the fuck not, right? Of course the eugenics dude would be related to the fucking evolution guy. Like, you can't make this shit up sometimes, the way life writes this story, If you don't know what eugenics is, then again, that's another one of those things to Google and learn. Basically, it's using genetics to guide the species instead of just leaving everything to fucking chance. Then that means things like selective breeding, and nowadays, like things in the nature of gene manipulation, and all of this is to achieve characteristics that we find desirable in us as a species, like breeding a fucking dog, So, needless to say, white America thought that this was just the bee's knees, as you could imagine, and the fucking idea took off. And Hitler modeled the entire German eugenics legislation on fucking American policy. The point of this is to truly learn what we're up against, and we have to learn about everything and all the things that truly got us to this point, It wasn't just racism or classism, it was and truly is fascism. We loved what the fucking Nazis were doing. Inviting them over for tea and shit, sharing notes. You see, what Hitler and his police were doing was literally stomping out insubordination. I don't know if you guys know this, but the Americans over here were having a little bit of a kerfuffle over fucking civil rights. And that shit was heating up. The American black man had seen foreign shores. He had been treated kindly by foreign nations and was welcomed far and wide during his tours during the First World War, only to come back home to segregation and black codes. It was absolute bullshit. Charles Lewis was one of those veterans, and he was only one of the over 380,000 black men that served this great nation during the Great War. And on December 15th, 1918, authorities fucking stormed Lewis's shack and tried to arrest him for stealing something. So they try to grab him and arrest him, and he fucking gets out of it, and he's trying to get them to treat him like a veteran and with dignity. This was not going to happen. So he fucking bounces from the house, and then finally they catch up to him, and they charge him with assault, resisting arrest, and all kinds of other shit. And the locals were fucking appalled by his actions. Oh my God, who the fuck does this guy think he is, they're saying to themselves, right? So they decide to fucking storm the jail with their masks on and drag Lewis out and lynch him to teach a fucking lesson to all the other Negroes. Black people were fighting wars within wars within wars. And they actually still are to this day. But this is the type of stuff that had America bubbling during that time. And this only grew after the Great War and was a big problem for those in charge of this country because they did not agree with the ideal that these men and women were seeking. Now, after this, we enter into the roaring 20s, right? And all that shit blew up in 1929 when the stock market crashed, right? So now we get this massive uptick in criminal activity and organized crime and civil issues, hand over fist, all the way up to the next World War. And then once again, the black man signs up to stand for this country, and once again, they come home to something that was no longer something that they could tolerate. Now that blacks knew their worth, they were going to push even harder for the rights that they knew that they deserved. And with that, the civil rights movement was born. At the end of the war, right, because as we already went over before, the FBI was fucking loving what the Nazis were doing, and how they were able to subvert local issues and stomp them out. And so they were over there snatching up Krauts like fucking hotcakes and giving them high-ranking positions over here. Just like they were doing everywhere else in the fucking country. All right, Shadow Walkers, so now pay attention, right? We've gone over the first regime of the Klan, which was the very first one that comes out during Reconstruction and shit like that. And then they get stomped out by the Ku Klux Act. And then we get the resurgence of the Klan, the second regime of the Klan. And that begins in 1910 up until 1945, right? And then that one ends, and then we get the third Klan, that begins in 1946, right? As the Third Reich ends, the Third Klan begins. You know what I mean? And that shit is so crazy, right? So let's run it down a little closer, right? So first Klan is from 1865 to 1870, and we talked about their rise and fall, right? Second Klan was from 1915, when they started getting funding from the Nazi Germany, right? And then the Third Reich the Third Klan starts in 1946, 1 year after they began Operation Paperclip. The Nazis were known as the Third Reich, which means the third regime, right? And supposedly these fascist fucks lost the war. Yet we have the Third Reich of the KKK begin right as the German benefactors were brought into this country, And it's probably worth noting that most of the Germans that we brought over here were stashed down south in the thickest parts of the KKK, And from that, we see a clear resurgence in the KKK and the Nazi regime all together now within America. And now here comes the swastika all over again. Yet it's in American hands. Now remember that we talked about learning little tricks and shit, and now this is how all these things connect. The rise of the civil rights movement and its demise and the tactics used from that point were all given by Nazi minds. And while the FBI imitated the Nazi secret police branches like the secret police and the Gestapo, the CIA was more interested in the fucking seedy shit, And the CIA, which is based in the South, was tasked with shutting down King, for instance, you know what I mean? And the CIA was the one involved in taking out everybody. First, they fucking killed Kennedy very publicly. Then 2 years later, El Shabazz is killed in a ballroom. And then MLK is killed on his balcony a year later. And then 2 months after that, RFK was killed by fucking Sirhan, again, very publicly. In 3 years, they killed everybody that was against them, as in anybody that was fighting for equal rights, in the fall of the cabal, right? Just like we talked about how the Pinkertons and the strikebreakers and everything that they learned to suppress, the slaves and the working class, everything that they've learned up until that point, they put into full effect when the Nazi minds got here. It all got real. It got real. Before there was a lot of I don't want to say true American patriotism, but it seemed like there was a more honest ideal in a way before the Nazis got here. After the Nazis got here, it was like fucking the gloves were off, it's vicious when you look at it. But this type of bold behavior just simply didn't exist in America prior to the Nazi ideology taking a hold of our armed fucking forces. Yes, the KKK was here, and yes, they did some shit like that, but it was like child's play almost when you look at the thing that the Nazis were doing. Like, for instance, the whole story of how the CIA killed MLK is fucking bananas. MLK's killer was fucking James Earl Ray. And the way this man was brought about is very interesting. Mr. Dreamkiller over here was in jail, and the KKK had put out a bounty on King, which was funded by the CIA, and it happened to find its way through the prison system all the way to James Earl Ray's ears, right? So now, Ray signs on and miraculously escapes prison like some movie fucking shit. He gets facial reconstructive surgery and a bunch of money, and then the rest of that is history. But now you know that not only did the CIA organize King's killing, but they also used the Third Reich to do it. And this civil rights battle raged through the years, leading to all these men being murdered. They murdered everyone in front of us. They made sure we were watching when they did it too. And ever since then, we have not had a single leader like any of them to look up to. And it's even worse now. And nowadays, we have to watch everything the cops do. So that way we can make sure, like, true justice is served for whoever the victim is in the situation, you know? But the original cop watchers were the Black Panthers. Now, there was so much to the Black Panthers that people don't really know. For instance, as, stated before, they were the very first cop watchers, but they also did many other things, like provided free breakfast for children, and they had a predominantly female membership, and created the Black is Beautiful movement. Back in part 1, we talked about how the first revolts were a mixed bag racially, and then also we touched on how some of the most violent uprisings have been racially mixed as well. And we also talked about how that was something they absolutely did not fucking like at all. Flash forward to the 60s, and that racist, cross-dressing fucking chicken hawk J. Edgar Hoover had a raging murder boner for anyone in the civil rights arena. Earlier we touched on how the FBI was pivotal in furthering civil rights and protecting freedoms, but now everything has changed. Now the Germans are here to help, right? So now they're actively working with other government agencies to snuff out each fucking bright light, one by one, like fucking Pitch Black, the Nightmare King in Rise of the Guardians. J. Edgar Hoover was pivotal in all of it. They feared the rise of the black man. And more than that, they also fear the whites that sided with them. They clearly gave zero fucks since they had Operation 40 take out JFK. I'm sure they played a part in Malcolm's fucking death. And then they had the KKK hire James Earl Ray to put an end to MLK. And on top of that, they fucking allow Sirhan to kill RFK. And now we are left with the Black Panthers. And then as far as the Black Panthers were concerned, they just fucked up when they killed MLK. He was the last vestige they had for proper representation. And with him gone, all that aggression got dialed up to 11. And now they were scared of an uprising, like for real, for real. And this gives birth to that fucking pedo Hoover's most well-known scheme, that being COINTELPRO, which means the counterintelligence program. COINTELPRO launched in 1956 and ran up until 1979. Through a series of covert and illegal projects conducted by the FBI aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting American political organizations, they stomped out every fucking bit of insurrection the people had mustered. These practices, though, are still very much in use today, if you can believe it or not. I too was victim of some of these practices. From all of my activities and shit, I was having my fucking phone tapped regularly, and my pregnant girlfriend was boxed in a stop sign and approached by a man in camo and another man in a suit, to which she had to fucking peel out and get out. This is real. We used to have to run drills on what to do if they came. And I know it sounds stupid, but it's a real part of my life. And when I was young, it took a major toll on me and my family, my young family. I was and still am very vocal about my feelings on our government and my love and faith in us as a country and community, And this is something that you may have already gathered by this point, and if you haven't, fucking give me time. I will get right the fuck up on my soapbox and preach for all of us to stand up and stand together, and people like me will always be a target because of the fiery fucking passion behind the words, regardless of color, and especially because of color, because I will be damned if I or anyone else steps into the fucking future without our brothers and sisters by our side. And they do not like this. And we just went over that. We have literal fucking proof of such things. Moving on though, right? Let's look at things a little bit closer. All throughout the civil rights movement, we see a highly militarized police force show up. And while most certainly it was started by Errol Vollmer, but again, there is more to the story. Adding further insult to injury, American taxpayers have been paying to keep fucking Nazis on the U.S. government's payroll ever since 1946. And in true Gestapo fashion, anyone who has dared to blow the whistle on the FBI's illicit Nazi ties has found themselves either spied upon, intimidated, harassed, labeled a threat to national security, or more. And as if the government's covert taxpayer-funded employment of Nazis after World War II wasn't bad enough, the U.S. government agencies like the FBI and the CIA and the military have fully embraced many of the Nazis' well-honed policing tactics. And they have used them repeatedly against the American citizens up until this very fucking day. And indeed, with every passing day, the United States government borrows yet another leaf from Nazi Germany's playbook. Secret police, secret courts, secret government agencies, surveillance, censorship, intimidation, harassment, torture, brutality, widespread corruption, entrapment, indoctrination, indefinite detention. This is who the fuck we are fighting. Surely, America's pastime is shitting on black people, but believe you me, the game has changed. This ain't your daddy's fucking baseball. This is Barry Bonds all fucking roided out, and these motherfuckers are hitting home runs way out of the goddamn park. Meanwhile, the people like you and me are Mark McGuire before fucking creatine. We can't even keep an eye on the fucking ball, let alone crush one out of the goddamn park. These are not tactics that are used by constitutional republics. These are hallmarks of authoritarian regimes, where the only law that counts comes in the form of heavy-handed, unilateral dictates from a regime that uses a secret police to control the populace. The danger is now posed by the FBI and the CIA, whose laundry list of crimes against the American people includes shit like we've gone over: surveillance, disinformation, blackmail, entrapment, intimidation, harassment and indoctrination, governmental overreach, abuse, misconduct, trespassing, enabling criminal activity, and damaging private property. And that's just based on what we fucking know. The FBI is planting undercover agents in fucking churches, synagogues, mosques, issuing fake search warrants to gain access to records, using intimidation tactics to silence people like you and me, recruiting high school students to spy and report on other students, or persuading people to plot acts of terror and then entrapping them at the same time. The overall impression of the nation's secret police force is that of a well-dressed thug, and it's flexing its fucking muscles, doing the boss's dirty work, and ensuring compliance, keeping tabs of all the potential dissidents and punishing all those who dare to challenge the status quo. And we aren't even talking about the fucking KKK either. This is a whole other dynamic that runs in parallel within all of this. We're just talking about the secret police right now. You see, the name of the game is unilateral destabilization. And from the very beginning, it wasn't just about keeping the black man down. This shit goes hand in hand with the white people on the other side of that coin. It is about keeping us all down and keeping us all separated and at each other's throats. They need to have clear lines drawn in the sand, and they will do anything to maintain those lines. That's why they have fought so hard to keep the black man down, and that's why they use the KKK to infiltrate everything and poison people's minds. They have done everything that they can, and quite honestly, it's worked. They foster this idea that rich whites are better while maintaining a lopsided system where people of color are looked at as less deserving. They have employed brutal tactics in every sector of our lives, from the highest point of the government to the smallest local knitting groups, And seriously, you can read about all this shit. You can read about all of it. It's wild, Make no mistake, for as long as this country has existed, the police have made it abundantly clear that there are two sets of rules and laws, one for whites and one for people of color. And what's more than that is the KKK and how close its ties are with the military, lawmakers, and police organizations. And then to top all of it off, it's not just racism in the KKK, but it's very much fascism and Nazism and fraternal bonds. And all of it is aimed at us, aimed at you, aimed at me. And they keep it aimed at us in the same way that they kept it aimed at those that came before us. And unless we stop it, they will have it aimed at those that come after us and after them as well. When Malcolm X left and came back as El Shabazz, he came with a new understanding. He saw people of all colors praying, talking, and breaking bread together. From that, he learned that it wasn't black versus whites. It was us versus racism. And it was a thought and an endeavor that led to his death. The problem is very much structural racism. And the fact that we've never dealt with it on top of it is fucking insane. And I think that we never even had any real intentions of dealing with it at all, really, either. You know what I mean? It was all just regulations that passed and a few laws here and there, but nothing outside of that. When you pull back the curtain, you find a scene that is straight out of Hollywood. Flash forward to today, and you have a system that has been unleashed upon the people like never before. There are 17,985 U.S. police agencies and counting, which include things like city police departments, county sheriff offices, state and police highway patrols, and federal law enforcement agencies, right? So, and then the FBI employs more than 35,000 individual offices and operates more than 56 separate different field offices, all within major cities across the U.S., as well as running 400 resident agencies in smaller towns. I would try to get the CIA numbers, but if I felt as though they were reliable at all, I would give some to you, but I fucking doubt that they would be. And that isn't to say that I feel like any of these numbers are fully legit. I'm sure that they're not. You know, I would assume that there's probably way more than what the average person knows about. But throughout this whole story, we have seen the rise of the police state and the rapid decline of freedom in America. And the way that it looks is very much the same way as the rise of the Germany secret police and the fucking Nazi regime. You know, like it tracks the same way. Like pull up the charts. They look exactly the fucking same. You know, it's like we're running right towards the same end, just differently. We're like living in a loop where no matter what we gain, we're still forced to relive assaults on our freedoms over and over, you know. And nowadays, there's a full-out war on the people, and they will beat the fuck out of anyone. We've seen the proof of this too, you know. Whether it was peaceful protesters being attacked or tear gassed, women being punched in the fucking face by police, old men being shoved to the ground with blood coming out of their fucking ears, people being shot at on their porches, in the new Gestapo that they just fucking released in Portland, Oregon, you know. Make no mistake, that is the American Gestapo, unmarked, unnamed, and unbound by conventional rules of engagement. The Night Watch evolved into a federalized, global standing army of government henchmen, and they're protected by the law, by legislative, judicial, and executive branches that are all on the same side, you know? And in case you beautiful fuckers were wondering, it's not on our side. They're not for us. You know, and not to sound stupid like that, but it's true. They've always been for the bourgeois. They've always been for them. It's never been about the people, ever. Doing this episode answered a lot of questions for me personally, you know, and I hope the series did the same for you as well. I was very confused as to why exactly we were seeing the alt-right come roaring out of nowhere. Confused as to why we were seeing swastikas along, you know, the side of the Confederate flag. And more so, I was more than curious to know why we weren't doing anything about that at all, you know? But now we know, you know? Now we know that no other country on this planet had more in common with Nazi Germany than America, you know? And not only that, but they learned everything from us to begin with. You know, and make no mistake, there are so many more connections that I just haven't found a way to work into all this shit yet. But I guess give me time, right? If I even have it. But I really don't want to be this Nazi guy, but the more you look, the more you find, and whether any of us want to work it out or not, like, it all connects, you know what I mean? Like, we're now a police state where agencies have carte blanche over everything and unlimited resources to carry out their actions, you know, and they will stop at nothing, and I mean nothing, to get what they want. So where do we go from here? We have seen some amazing strides made on a sweeping scale, but none of it legislative since the death of George Floyd anyway, you know? We saw actual legislation get passed during the civil rights movement, and look at how much good that did, really, because we're still going through the fucking shit today. There is so much to go over to even bother doing a recap here for this episode, but I mean, it really is fucking nuts when you think about it all. At the end of the day, I think the only thing that matters when it comes to this is that we need to see some clear, immediate changes to our police system. Outside of that, we need to truly, fully embrace the words, all men are created equal, and liberty and justice for all. Next up would be to take a really good look at whether or not we've become Nazis or not. Because for all intents and purposes, the lines are getting really fucking blurry. And then finally, we need to decide who we want to be as a nation. We, the people, have become passive, polarized, gullible, easily manipulated, and lacking so much in critical thinking. We become complicit, silent partners in creating a police state similar to that of the terror practiced by former regimes. And more importantly, we become our own enemies, knocking each other down for critically thinking, you know, for talking too white, for talking too black, for not being white enough, for not being black enough, for being poor. We become fickle and self-absorbed. We become A nation that looks at people as fashionable and unfashionable for friendship. And we've been tricked into thinking that it's white power or black power. And both of those words kind of are starting to sound the same to me. Just really aggressive. You know, before black power didn't really seem like that, but don't get me wrong, I understand why and where the anger comes from. But a lot of it feels like we're heading towards like another civil war in a way. And I can't be the only one that feels that shit. Now it's just like everybody's mean mugging. Everybody's so willing to be hateful. And it's all this shit that everybody's sharing. We're all sharing hateful, aggravating memes that just drive division right down the fucking heart of all of us. And some of it's gotta stop. You know, we are more powerful and more beautiful together than we could ever be apart. This is our nation, a nation made by and for the people. They have not stripped us of all of our power yet, and we can still make some big changes, but we have to do it together, and we have to be willing to take some risks. Above all else, though, we need to forgive each other. We are all victims here. None of us chose to be born, let alone to be born into the lives or into the social settings that we've been born into. Aside from any system that needs to change, we need to change. We have to take responsibility for who we are, for what we have all become, for what we have allowed to transpire. We are the key to everything. Not the governments or anything like that, not laws, us. You know, this world is ours and it belongs to the people. And once we realize that, things will never be the same. But that's it for this episode, though, my fellow Shadow Walkers. This has been a heavy walk through some dark parts of our history, and hopefully you've all come out of this a little more enlightened. You know, we really need to know what we're up against if we ever hope to win, right? So thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you for being here with me. I had a vacation pop up in the middle of this writing, and it really fucked up my whole vibe and flow, and it took me a little while to get back to where I was so I can complete writing this episode, as well as just reading all of this stuff really took a heavy toll on me as well, and there's a lot of kind of internalizing that had to be done. But that was a huge part of the delay in getting this episode out, so I apologize for that. I think we might take a break here or after the next episode. I'm not sure, but I really want to come back with having a bunch of episodes for you so we can just be more and more consistent, because that's what I really want. And then plus I can put more time and effort into the show like we were talking about before. Now, before we check out, I just want to say one more congratulations to our contest winner, Thorn. And thank you all so much who participated in the giveaway. And thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening to part 1 and part 2 of this series. I do really hope that it means something for you. It meant a lot to me. And it's more of a conversation I would love to have moving forward. But really a talking one, not where I'm talking at people. Like, I need to really talk to people about this and get some real thoughts from other people and to see how other people have internalized these ideas and what their beliefs on them are, because this is such a heavy topic, and I think it's so much more than we could ever put into 1 or 2 episodes, because this is life-changing. This is stuff that we have to do, you know, in our own lives moving forward, and there's so much information that has to be unlearned and then new information that has to be learned. So it's a long walk that we're all going to have to take, and we're going to have to take it together. So really, I just want all of you to know, black, white, yellow, red, I fucking love you. I'm here for you. I'm down for a better tomorrow. I think we all need to be down for the same thing and be willing to lock arms and meet that tomorrow together. But listen, thank you so much for being here, and this has been another episode of Bright Lights and Scary Shadows.
Sorry.